Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this, the first of the Transindus conversations with our heroes of travel. And naturally, we have Sir Michael here to headline this. I trust everybody has been safe and well through these very difficult times. And I'd like to thank everyone for letting us into your homes through Zoom this evening, and how different it is to be doing this event in this way over Zoom rather than in person as we're used to doing over so many years. Yeah. The cause here for coming together, twofold. First, to raise a little bit of money for Give India, the charity that's been working towards helping migrant workers and day wage workers in the metropolitan cities of India. And we've raised a significant sum for those. And we hope to be able to help them out in a small way through the money that we've raised. The other is that we all have a shared love of travel. And while our travel plans are on pause at this stage, and we haven't been able to get out and about as we might like to, our dreams and hopes of travel continue, and our wish to travel hasn't diminished any. So what we can do is reminisce of past experiences and dream of future adventures. And who better to help us do that than my dear friend and everybody's hero of travel, the inimitable Sir Michael Palin.
Welcome, Sir Michael. Thank you very much.
It's a great pleasure and a privilege to have you here.
Nice to be here and talk about, as you say, places we've all loved going to and hope we'll go to in the future.
Yes, you've kept us entertained with all of your stories of traveling across the world from pole to pole, and you've encouraged us to stay a little bit longer and to explore a little bit deeper and to engage with local people, maybe things people may not have done previously. And we've all benefited from this. But where did your wanderlust initially come from? Where did it start, all this adventure?
I think it started very early on. I mean, I grew up in Sheffield, and it was the sort of 1940s, early 1950s. There wasn't really much likelihood of traveling anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. So I read, but I loved the images of the rest of the world. I would read in magazines. I loved the stories that were told. So I used to go to church on Sundays, and we'd have missionaries occasionally would turn up and tell us wonderful stories about baptizing people in the Limpopo River, with crocodiles swimming around. And all that. I thought, this is adventure. This is wonderful. But it was really a feeling that I wanted to see round the corner, and over the next hill. That's what I was from very early on. I remember wanting to move, and as soon as I had a bicycle I could ride of my own, I was only about 8 or 9 or 10. I used to cycle off as one could then without worry or anxiety.
Horrendous worry for your mother, though.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, perhaps I usually went with a friend, but we'd cycle off into Derbyshire, which is the Peak District area, which was very, very beautiful. Mm-hmm. And rather extraordinary landscape. So my imagination could kick in, because I think a lot of the joy of traveling is your imagination. You imagine a place and then you go and see it, and it's how the two merge together. And I was just sort of drawn to the feeling of going to places.
Mm-hmm. Oh God, but it was a very different when you began to do all of your travel for us on screen with these series. It was a very different part to the part you'd played on television and in film up until that stage. I remember seeing you as a child, just as I'd arrived from India, very young child, and we had a weekly weaning of Michael Palin at the time on television. I believe it was a Saturday evening, but every Saturday we would sit down to another episode of Monty Python. So a transition from that into travel, did that happen because you instigated it, or it was an opportunity that arose you couldn't past?
I was approached out of the blue to be the presenter on Around the World in 80 Days.
Uh-huh.
But the fact is that sort of it had been sort of smouldering there, this desire to travel, to do some traveling in some shape or form
Mm-hmm.
for a long, long time. You know, comedy was a distraction. I really wanted to be traveling. And sometimes the two came together. When we did Monty Python, for instance, Terry Jones and myself were very keen in traveling to film. So we went up to Scotland to shoot the Monty Python, The Holy Grail, because it was wonderful, stunning landscape. And it was free, and it was much less boring than London West 12, where all the rest of the film was done. So I was a mind ready to be sort of led.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to the BBC, yes, Around the World,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, sounds the perfect thing to do. I was 45 by then, and I didn't imagine I'd do a lot of traveling, but that was the start of, well, 8 or 9 series, really. But I was there, I was the right person at the right time,
Uh-huh.
I think. And
How grateful we are for it.
well, I don't regret it, although I was nervous about it when we were doing it, because I suppose I wasn't quite sure what I'd been chosen for. Was I chosen to sort of be an actor enacting Phileas Fogg from the Jules Verne story?
Uh-huh.
Was I, was I supposed to be attempting to be a geographer or a reporter? Neither of which I was very confident about. And for the first sort of 2 programs of that series, I wasn't absolutely sure how I should do it and how I should play it. And then we did this one episode which took place almost entirely on a dhow going from Dubai to Bombay. And that was an extraordinary mind-changing experience, because there was a crew of 4 or 5 of us, I think, on a ship with 18 Gujarati fishermen.
Oh, God.
Very poor, just fishing was just their only livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
And we, with all our technical skills and our technical equipment, we were absolutely nothing without their ability to sail down this quite dangerous waterway, which is, the Gulf, and take us to Bombay. And there was, it wasn't as if there was a sort of cabins or anything. Everybody slept on deck.
Your cameraman, the crew, and everybody else.
Yes. I mean, they shared, and the 18 fishermen, and they shared their food with us, which was just as well, because we brought with us some stuff from Sainsbury's that just wasn't quite a match on these wonderful curries these made. So for 7 days, we had to get to know each other, even though we didn't share a language, but there was enough that we were doing together to share our experiences, to learn little about each other. And by the end of that, I realized I hadn't thought about what role I was supposed to play. I just was myself with them. And from then on, I thought, that's it. Just be yourself.
Yes, it became.
You'll make mistakes. You'll look an idiot sometimes, but it doesn't matter. At least that's sort of honest.
I think it's been that honesty that's come through each of the series, and the interactions, the squatting on the floor, the sort of suffering with breath as you climb various passes and mountains.
Yeah.
All of that authenticity is what's kept us gripped into your series. Which has been your favorite one?
That's almost impossible question to answer. I mean, the longest one we did was Full Circle, around the Pacific. And in terms of countries seen, landscapes seen, the adventure of getting around a very, very long journey, something like 50,000 miles in the end, from Alaska right round and back to Alaska. There was nothing that quite equaled that. I just saw so much. There's the Russian Far East, and then China, and then Vietnam, the Philippines, then down to Australia, New Zealand, all the way up from Cape Horn to the very tip of Alaska. Extraordinary things. But in terms of sort of concentrated joys and pleasures, I would say probably Himalaya was the one, because again, that was heroic and magnificent scenery you were seeing, but also you were dipping in and out of different countries and slightly different cultures. and meeting and learning about the people who lived in those quite difficult environments.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
especially remember the bit of you having traveled into Bhutan. And at that stage, I hadn't been to Bhutan, and I thought, how incredible, how intrepid. And that was one of the things that made me want to head off out there. I'd been sending people out to Bhutan, but I hadn't been. What were your impressions of the place?
well, it was rather, I mean, my first impression, it's a silly word, but it's sort of quaint, you know, it was almost like it was a little bit of a time warp in that I think they'd only actually allowed television in the country 6 years before we got there in 2004. They wore a national dress for everyday life.
Yes.
The buildings all had to conform to a certain, albeit very beautiful sort of standard.
Yeah.
And it seemed a country that was very much decided what it wanted to be and how it wanted to control itself, and didn't really want to be spoiled too much by the rest of the world. And it was absolutely enchanting place. And you know, I mean, the people there they weren't backward just because they didn't have television. In fact, quite the opposite. They're rather bright, sharp, interested people. But they were they preserved their country well. They looked after their country well. They cared about the look of it. And I think one of the best treks we ever did in any journey was up from Jamalhari right down to Paro, going through about 3 or 4 totally different, you know,
Valleys,
regions of from you know, the snows down to the heat of the valley, and that was beautiful and utterly memorable. I think it took us about 3 days.
I can imagine the logistics of getting a whole camera crew and a team into this valley and coming out of it must have been quite something as well.
Well, the Bhutanese are very good at that. I think mountain people are very good at just getting logistics. They have to be. Really. Otherwise, you just give up, wouldn't you? Living at sort of 90 degrees all the time. But there's the sun's coming out. Can you feel that? Yeah. But they, it's gone in again. British summer. But they were very, very competent, very good at sort of moving our stuff from place to place. And it's a very easy place to operate in Bhutan, very efficient.
I think you came out of Bhutan along the eastern edges into eastern India then, if I remember, and into the sort of northeastern states of India.
Yes.
And you went off to see some wildlife there. There hasn't been an awful lot of wildlife that I've seen. Are you a particular enthusiast, and would you want to travel into exploring a little bit more of that?
I'm absolutely fascinated by everything I see. This is the problem. I can't deal with it all. And I wish I knew more about the wildlife that we saw. The problem is that I don't have David Attenborough with me to travel that I could. That I know.
Put the two of you together.
Well,
wonderful.
I mean, it's just somebody who knows the names of things and why they grow there and what sort of breed they are of bird or beast. We didn't really, that wasn't our brief particularly. Also, we moved pretty fast. The thing that sort of characterized the programs was that we covered a lot of ground. And we didn't have much time to stop and look at the wildlife. And if you really want to see the wildlife, as I'm sure you know, you have to be patient. Yes. You can't just snap your fingers and expect all the buffaloes to appear. So you need time, and you also need special equipment. We filmed in the Amazon for Full Circle. There was amazing birds flying overhead, but our cameraman was always just missed them because he was filming me. And someone said, "Oh, look at that! Look at that! Oh, look at that bee!" So he'd get the camera up there. By the time he'd got it focused, the bird had gone. So you need special patience and a special way of doing things to get really good wildlife. But I'm very interested in it.
Well, from your television series, there were a lot of diaries. You wrote some diaries after the documentaries appeared.
Yes.
And they were hugely successful. And I think a lot of them became bestsellers. There's one particular incident of, I think, one of your books topping Madonna off her perch of being
Be careful what you say. Yes, yes, yes. We did. We conquered Madonna's sex. I think that was the name of her book.
Yes.
I wish I'd thought of that. Michael Palin's sex would have, sold so much more. But anyway, no, we did at one time. That was quite nice moments.
Yes.
And of course, the best moments are, I remember John Cleese had a book out, and we got ahead of that for a bit. Trusted a little. So that was.
Well, I suppose rivalry.
No, I'm glad we did the books, because when I travel, I always keep notes. I think it's very important, because you do forget things, even though you have photos and all that. A lot of little detail you forget very, very quickly. And
very true.
The books are an important way of it was my diary rather than necessarily what happened on screen. This was, what I saw.
I've traveled with a few of our clients on a few occasions, and those who are avid travelers and will go out repeatedly, twice, 3 times a year, to new places, to discover new places, will take meticulous notes of absolutely everything, and we get reams of them shared with us. It's wonderful. It's very, very nice. And I mean, for ourselves, we need to keep notes, but to see clients' notes come through, they are really very perceptive.
Well, I mean, everybody picks out something different.
Exactly.
I found that when we were filming. Nigel Meekins, my cameraman, the director, would be looking at one thing, I'd be looking at another thing. If you'd sat us down at the end of the day and said, exactly what did you see today, we'd all have had something.
You'd have something different.
And that's great. And you share those and pool those together, and you get a really nice sort of portrait of where you've been.
Okay, so that's sort of 3 careers or 4 that we've been through. You've been an accomplished comedian, you've been an accomplished actor, you've authored books, you've fronted wonderful documentaries, and then there are these children's books that come up as well. Oh my goodness, how many talents! What are the children's books about?
Well, one was called, I think it was called something on the toothache pill. I can't even remember what it was now. It was all about somebody having a terrible toothache. And little things that, as when you have children, the things that they get worried about, upset about. The toothache was a big thing. So Small Harry and the Toothache Pill, that was it.
Right.
Very good. Others were there was Cyril and that little boy called Cyril, who ended up in the House of Parliament and things like that. Cyril in the House of Commons. I think that fell between 2 markets, I think the politicians didn't buy it and the children didn't know what Commons were all about. But it was all, I mean, you make it sound as though it's been all rather easy, and it hasn't really. I mean, I just have an insatiable curiosity. I love challenges and opportunities to sort of have a go at things. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But the only way you find out is to do it.
I mean, we were very excited when you approached us and asked us about your travels into Odisha to research a novel.
Yes.
I believe the first of your novel. So that was very exciting for us to hear about. And what were your impressions of Odisha? What did you think you hoped to find, and what did you find there?
Well, I hoped to find a landscape and a sort of environment which I could then write about with some sort of direct experience. I didn't want to make up whatever they were, the hills and all that. I hadn't been prepared for the beauty of the sort of the temples in Bhubaneswar.
Yes.
They're quite extraordinary. I hadn't expected that. Because what I was doing, my story took place really up in the hills, Nyamgiri Hills, I think they were called, or something like that. Yes. Anyway, that's where I wanted to see what was happening with the big aluminium plant that had been imposed itself on tribal land of tribe up there, and how this worked. And so the closer I got really to the heart of what my story was, the
Mm-hmm.
more it meant to me. And actually, it was you realize up in the hills there, they're quite poor.
Mm-hmm.
Life is hard, but the Dongria Kond, who were the tribe, were, I mean, a lot of people would say, well, they didn't do anything, and they had a fairly laid back lifestyle, but they had lived in the forest for thousands of years. They knew how to husband the forest. They looked after the forest very, very well. And
Mm-hmm.
here were these great tractors and bulldozers poised to rip through the forest and destroy um,
Very ecosystem.
their holy mountain. That was
Mm-hmm.
it, their holy hill, which
Mm-hmm.
had been part of their culture and for years and years. And so being at the heart of all that was quite exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized how, I mean, India is vast, how difficult it was to sort of get the balance there between progress, which
Mm-hmm.
a fairly poor state like Odisha needed money,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, you've got to respect people who've lived there way before anyone else moved in. You
Yeah.
can't just
Up
destroy their land.
India has been quite good at allowing its minority communities to thrive and flourish. And so
They
this was quite an imposition. And I think people have realized that. So
they
progress.
were very good, actually. I mean, the federal government,
Mm-hmm.
Department of Forests, they said, look, to solve this, because what the big company was saying was, we will give you a better way of life, we'll give you better housing,
Mm-hmm.
better education, and all this. But in fact, they were just offering them concrete huts rather than the sort of the straw huts they lived in. But the federal government said, look, let them choose, let there be a sort of open election, debate to find out who wants what.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this debate, and the entire tribe were allowed to be given a view as to whether they wanted their lives improved or not. And 98% said they didn't want their lives improved by this particular company.
Absolutely.
So that was amazing. And there's only about 850 of them.
Mm-hmm. And they managed to achieve that, and it was incredible to see it spoken of in your book. And I was absolutely thrilled to have read that.
Well,
And
thank you. You got me there. Yes, and back.
well, I remember your overnight trip in a little hut on the ground in a tented camp, because we couldn't find you
Oh yes,
in the places that you wanted to go out.
yes. No, that's right. That was. But that's part of traveling. I didn't know I'd be staying in a sort of corner of a field, really, in a little hut.
Yeah.
But it was great, and to be up in the morning in somewhere completely different from where I normally would be. And to
We
take
did
it all
have
in.
our fingers crossed. We were very worried. So sending Sir Michael Palin out into the middle of a field, but you were very gracious about it.
Well, I was only Michael Palin then, which I still am to most people. But that was a terrific experience and very valuable for the book.
Mm-hmm. Good. And you've gone on after that to write another book, a very historical account of the ship called Erebus. Have I said it right?
No, Erebus, I think it is. But I don't know. All the people who would have sailed on the ship are now dead. They might well have called it Erebus, but Erebus is what I call it.
Erebus. Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, that's been very well received. And I think you particularly wanted to write that book because of its historical significance, and it was a departure from what else you had done in the past. And that book's been received very well. Did you have to travel to research that particular book also?
Yes, the idea came up out of the blue when I just happened to be researching some particular character, and found out that at the age of 22 he'd been on this ship which had gone down to Antarctica, one of the very first ships ever to go down to Antarctica in 1839. They were away for 4 years. A tiny little sailing ship with no engine or anything went round Antarctica, charted lands that people had never seen before, confirmed that there was an actual continent of Antarctica. Then this same ship, which was interesting, why I called my book The Story of a Ship, was it was chosen to go on Northwest Passage expedition to the Arctic, which was, full of national glory and expectation. And that was a complete disaster. And both the ships and all the men disappeared. And people still don't know quite where they all went, although the ships were discovered. Erebus was discovered 4 or 5 years ago underneath the waters of the Canadian Arctic. So a great story of triumph and of tragedy. And I did, what I wanted to do was also inject my own love of travel into the story. So I went to some of the places where the ships had been, quite remote places. I mean, Hobart in Tasmania, the Falkland Islands, the Northwest Passage itself, Ascension Island in the middle of the Atlantic, just places which the people on board that ship would have seen and spent some time in, because I wanted to feel what it was like there. So I enjoyed that particular way of writing a story and a bit of historical research and putting myself into the story at the same time.
How incredible. So what's next on your agenda? You've done so many different things. What's coming up next for us? Which corner of the world will you travel to, or will you take an entirely new avatar all over again?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, I'm aware now. I'm 77 years old, and I had open heart surgery in September last year. Well, so, I realized that a bit of interior work had to be done, rather like an old building. I nearly said an old, much-loved building, but I wouldn't be sure of that. Anyway, I feel absolutely terrific now. I feel much better than I did before. But I think it will probably that and just the fact I have 4 grandchildren, I don't want to go on long journeys away from them particularly. I will do shorter journeys, and I'm very much hoping. I'm currently working on a book about my great uncle Harry, who was an odd life he had. Didn't seem terribly successful, but he ends up fighting at Gallipoli in the First World War, and he was killed at the Somme. And I've just been sort of trying to work out how he would live a life like that, how it came to be, and found out certain things. Like he spent a lot of his life after he left school in India, and he went and worked for the Great Peninsular Railway in India, and then he worked on several tea plantations in Assam, some of which where I've been to on some of my travels. And then, it didn't work out. He came back, went off to New Zealand to work as a farmhand, and war broke out. And he came back and fought for the New Zealand Army at Gallipoli. But the India section, I'm really trying to get as much information as I can about what he might have done there. But I'm realizing that an awful lot of my family were involved in India at that time, in the sort of 1900s.
How exciting. We'll have to research much more of that.
So it does mean that I hope I will be able to go, certainly want to go to Assam again, and also to where he was based for the Mumbai again, but also where he was based when he was working for the railway. So yes, I'm looking forward to that. To go with a purpose like that, to me, makes it all more exciting.
Very exciting, yes, I'm sure. And so whenever you're ready for that, whenever this pandemic lifts and you're able to move around freely again, it will be very exciting to help you try and achieve that. What are your views of the present crisis, and how do you think we will be traveling in the coming future?
Well, I'm generally an optimist in that I hope that things will work out well. And that's all you can be, or you can be a pessimist, because no one really knows whether, this thing we're told is going to be a second wave, which could be more serious than the first. if a vaccine is not found for a year or 2 years, something like that, then I think traveling will become very, very difficult indeed. Because, I mean, it's not just us. We tend to think, oh, it's the number of cases are falling here. Quarantine has been dropped. We can travel to these countries and they can come here. But forget the rest of the world. A lot of the rest of the world are just coming into the coronavirus.
Yes, I think everybody's dipping in and out.
Moment.
But there was some lovely news this morning of in the Telegraph about a new vaccine with from the Oxford University research team, and there are clinical trials going on. So there is a great deal of hope. And we've been resilient through other pandemics, through other crises. We've come through them all.
I hope so. I think it's people have got to overcome a fear, particularly of flying, I think, and being encased in a small airplane for a long time. None of us ever felt that was very hygienic anyway, but now you're just even more worried. I think, to be honest, if you want to travel, you'll find a way of doing it.
Certainly.
I mean, your particular company and what you do, you tailor it to particular needs and small numbers of people.
Absolutely.
I think that's going to be the future. I think people will have to suddenly pay more to travel rather than have cheap seats with the necessity of cramming together on airplanes. So smaller and better. Perhaps.
But that's never been our forte at all, to do large, big trips. And most of our travelers have wanted their journeys to be tailored much in the same way that you would hope to want to go and see and research something. They've wanted to do that. And while we do have a few group tours, they tend to be quite small and things.
Yes.
So I'm sure that's the way to go. Lots of hygiene, lots of new checks and things. But I think overall, people's perception of travel will need to change as well. It is a privilege for us to be able to go and impose ourselves on other communities and check out their customs and cultures and just give it that little bit more respect, perhaps, than we've done in the past.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I've always felt that the great privilege of travel is I learn things. I'm not going to teach anybody anything. I mean, I'm not a colonial in that way. You know, I'm interested in how they live, whatever circumstances they're in, what their culture is, what their religion is, how they educate their children, what crops they grow, what machines they make, all that sort of thing. You know, it's the differences that I find fascinating, and I want to learn about those. So I think one must travel with a sense of inquiry and a sense of being very privileged to go into someone else's towns, villages, wherever, and make contact with them. I found generally, if one has the right attitude, this is something we sort of realized when we were doing our television films. You've got to ask first.
Yes.
There's no point going in and saying, we're going to take a picture of, just carry on doing what you're doing. You've got to be straight with them. You've got to say, we're here because we want to learn about this. How do you do that? Where did this dance come from? What food are you making?
But I'm delighted to say, I think our travelers do that. And I think their yearning for learning about new cultures will keep their ambitions of travel alive. So we're looking forward to not curtailing our business or our operations in any way, but we think that there will be a much greater demand for our sort of travel than perhaps the larger group travels.
I think also one can be quite sort of imaginative about how you organize tours. So it doesn't have to necessarily be to see the buildings. I mean, if there's a particular wonderful Indian novel or something like that, which is set somewhere, make the tour, you know, for people who've read the novel and fallen in love with it. You know, I've been reading R.K. Narayan. I don't know if you know about him.
Yes, I do.
Lovely, lovely
The
story.
Malgudi Hills.
That's right. I don't know where they are exactly, but I was absolutely intoxicated by the story, little feeling of little towns and
Yeah.
the sort of trade-offs people did between each other, the little ambitions and the
Mhm.
the disappointments and all that. I
Yeah.
think you could do an hour-round tour, to the Malgudi Hills. Find
That
the Malgudi Hills. Mm.
right. So I think we'll have to take that on. We did try sort of Kipling journeys out into jungles and so on, and they were a huge success. So we'll
Yeah,
have to take on the Malgudi Hills as well.
yeah, yes, yeah,
That
very good stories.
good. Excellent. And you say that you might be traveling to India in research of books. But other than that, for relaxation, do you travel as well? And where do you hope to get out to for just relaxation, if at all?
Well, I haven't done a lot of traveling, obviously, since the coronavirus, and also with my operation last September. I had to be at home. So my
Mm-hmm.
traveling has been very close to Hampstead Heath, which is wonderful. So I walk over that on a
Amazing, amazing
daily
place.
basis, and that's very nice. But I
Mm-hmm.
haven't really travelled just because there's been, anxiety about travelling and going to places and imposing on people. You
Mm-hmm.
know, um, I had hoped to go to the Middle East to do some filming for a series with the team that made North Korea, the North Korea series. I
Fabulous.
did about 2 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and they were a great team. I'd love to work with them again. I think we're hoping we can try and revive our idea for early next year, but who knows? Who
I mean,
knows?
that must have been a challenge trying to seek permission for getting into North Korea. And I'm
Yeah,
amazed that you managed to do that. So I don't think any other team has been in to make a documentary there.
I don't think they've made a documentary quite like that. People have film bits, but we
Mm-hmm.
spent quite a long time. There's a man, an English guy, Nick, who lives in Beijing, and he has for a long time taken tours into North Korea. So he knows the people there. He knows how to work the bureaucracy there.
Mm-hmm.
And without him, I don't think we could have got nearly as much access. And the director went out there and we had a look around. He had a look around first and made sure that we just wanted to say to them, we don't just want to see monuments and statues,
Mm-hmm.
wonderful though they are.
Yes.
We just want to try and find out where people eat a meal in the evening, what a school looks like,
Yeah.
where they work in the fields. So I ended up on my 75th birthday working in the fields in North Korea, trying to put a sequence together where I'm helping this doughty farming lady
Uh-huh.
plant some, actually just some weed some fields.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to interview as we were doing it. In the end, the my guide, Korean guide, just said, "Well, what did you think of him? What was it good having him here?" And
Mm-hmm.
she said a few pithy sentences in Korean, and then my guide said, "Oh yes," she said no, she said, "You're completely useless. Why would you want someone like that working in the field?" I thought that was okay. Now, in England, people would be very polite, however useless you were.
Yes.
So you tried your best.
No, but yes,
So,
she's got work to do. She can't be hanging about
no,
with.
exactly. It's just, well, why am I wasting my time with him? He isn't any good. It's not what he does. He doesn't weed fields, especially on his 75th birthday. But there you go, another great moment of travel and
Another.
never to be forgotten birthday, really.
Uh-huh. We've got, I think some people have been asking some questions here. Uh, will you be undertaking any future travel series? You've said that you may do the Middle East at some stage, but is it something we can look forward to in the near future or?
Well, we have had to postpone it because of coronavirus,
Certainly.
and we're provisionally regrouping in April next year,
Uh-huh.
which hopefully will give long enough for things to have sorted themselves out, second waves, whatever.
Uh-huh.
So that would be something for September
Mm.
2021. I don't think we're going to get much done before that.
Uh-huh.
On the other hand, the BBC are doing a nice project at the moment, which is they've taken 4 of my travel journeys
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing a sort of bits of archive, bits of behind the scenes filming, interviewing people who helped make the shows, asking me why I was doing it, what was I doing this for, reading. I'll be reading bits of my diary as they go along. So those will be shown in at the end of this year, probably in November on BBC Two. So there will be a chance to see travel.
Can't wait for that. It's nice to have a narrative and a deeper knowledge of knowing what you've seen in the past and enjoy it.
Yes, I think I mean, it's of necessity because very few programs are being made at the moment. So they're looking at archive. But I think it's just, rather than just show them again, I think to take them apart a little bit and see how they were made and talk to the cameraman and all that could be very interesting. So I've got great hopes for that.
Well, we have somebody who's wanting to know if you had to choose only one country to travel again in the future, which one would that be?
Oh, I'm going to make so many enemies. If I was asked, I would say Scotland.
Oh, and
The only reason being is that.
Is that because of any family connections there, or?
Well, there are family connections, but not particularly. It's just that I've, ever since I first went to Scotland to Edinburgh Festival in 1964, which is when I did a review with Terry Jones and others, which changed my life, really, made me suddenly aware that I could perhaps be an actor and a writer. But so I loved Edinburgh. I thought it was a spectacular city. And I've since grown to like Glasgow very much. And but it's really the Western Isles. It's the access to the most stunning scenery, not far from your own home, which is what I love. I would like to say, well, Peru, brilliant country. Bhutan, Nepal, all have fantastic scenery. But I would feel reasonably comfortable in Scotland, and it's still fairly spectacular.
Well, I've loved Scotland on every trip of ours, and I remember taking the children there when they were very little, and driving through and getting lost on some of its trails. So that it's always been fabulous.
Yes. The only other cars you're likely to see on the road are making adverts. I always love that, cars. They show cars whizzing along. They always choose a road in Scotland where there's been no other vehicle for a year, which is not quite the same as the M25. Still, yes.
Oh, terrifying. Which leads me on to the next question. Someone, Jeff Lightfoot, would like to ask Sir Michael, what was the most frightening trip you've ever done? Have you ever been frightened on any of your trips?
I have been frightened, usually slightly later than I ought to have been. There was, I suppose really it was our journey to the North Pole that was...
in this pole to pole series?
Yes. Because, I mean, we had to start at the North Pole, and we literally did go there, but you had to fly. And we flew in a small light plane, 300, 400, 500 miles from any sort of base of any kind. And I suddenly realized if you're going out there, if anything happened to this little plane, that was it. And normally you're on a normal air routes, where you can put down here, sorry, we're coming down there. So that was a little bit worrying. And then when we came to land at the North Pole, we had to land on floating ice. And the ice was beginning to break up. It was May when we did it. And these guys had to land a plane on a moving ice floe that was also breaking up. And they aborted the landing twice. And I said to the pilot, don't worry, we'll start somewhere else. We'll call it Peterborough to the pole, anything, so we don't have to start here.
Did you abandon that?
He was determined to have a go, and he got us down in the end.
Right.
Some extraordinary filming by Nigel. The whole plane just shudders and shakes. And then I realized, got back in the plane. I thought, well, now we've got to get back. Another 500 miles over ice. And we ran into a storm, and we didn't film that because it was really a bit nasty. We had to put down in Greenland, and there's a good story actually, because we were told
a very good pilot to have on your side.
Yes, no, well, we had a very wonderful moment because we had to put down in this. We did find an air base run by the Danes in North Greenland, and we put down there in the middle of the night. And we'd been told that we could just stay the night. And we were told there was a hut where there were some soldiers who would look after us. And we went along to this hut and opened the door. One of the soldiers saw me, and his face sort of drained of blood. And he just, his mouth opened and shut and all that. And I said, hello. And he said, yes, come in. And I saw on the table a DVD of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And suddenly this place, 1,000 miles from anywhere, in walked the man who said, "Nee."
As long as he didn't think you were there for the Spanish Inquisition.
No, he was. Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah. Oh,
Dancing into sketches with that particular line. Yes. Oh, good. So, Michael, thank you very much for your time.
it's a
And
pleasure.
it's been an
Great.
absolute pleasure. The 45 minutes have skipped by in no time at all. Any last comments that you'd like to make to our avid travelers who are hoping to be able to go out either this autumn or then in the coming spring?
Well, all I can say is I hope so much that you manage to get out there, you manage to travel. I know what it's like, when you get under your skin.
I don't promise there'll be anything like your diaries, because I keep notes of which hotel had a nicer bedroom and which one they had nicer service and so on.
That's all right. I when I got to a hotel anywhere, I would always thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our participants here. And if any of you would like to have any more details, we've recorded this particular journey. We'll try and edit out any little bits where I've perhaps said anything wrong. Have it available.
I was seeing one recently where the house smoke alarm went off. My wife was creating some concoction with cheese and courgettes. And it just rang around the room behind me. This terrible screech, you know what it's like, and you can't stop them for a minute.
You can't.
This has gone so smoothly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And lots of luck to everybody. Keep in touch, and we will all meet up quite soon again. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.